I stood at the edge of the hotel ballroom, holding a glass of champagne I hadn't touched, watching my fiancé laugh with his colleagues across the room, and I felt absolutely nothing. Not nerves, not love. Not even the quiet, comfortable warmth I kept telling myself would eventually come. Nothing. Just a kind of hollow stillness, like standing in a room after all the furniture has been moved out. Our engagement party had started 2 hours ago. My mother had spent 4 months planning it. The flowers were ivory and sage. The caterer was the same one who'd done my cousin Rachel's wedding, which my mother had described as flawless approximately 47 times. Everything was exactly as it was supposed to be. That was the problem. My name is Claire, I'm 32 years old. I was a senior project manager at a marketing firm in Boston. I had a savings account, a gym membership I actually used, a 5-year plan, and a fiancé named Derek who checked every box on every list I'd ever been told to write. Stable. Successful. Handsome in the way that photographs well. Loved by my parents. Tolerated by my friends, though they mostly said things like, "He's very Derek," when I asked what they thought of him, which I eventually stopped asking. We'd been together for 4 years. Engaged for 11 months. The wedding was scheduled for June. The venue was booked. The dress was hanging in my mother's guest closet because she didn't trust me not to wrinkle it. I should have been happy. I kept waiting to be happy. I excused myself from a conversation with Derek's mother about centerpiece options, ivory roses versus white peonies, a debate that had somehow consumed 3 weeks of my life and slipped out the side door onto the hotel terrace. It was October. Boston was cold and clean-smelling, the kind of night that feels like it's trying to wake you up. I leaned against the railing and breathed. That's when I heard it. A child crying. Not inside. Out here, around the corner of the terrace, half hidden behind one of the large potted hedges the hotel used for outdoor events. I almost turned back. It wasn't my business. The party was my business, the centerpieces were my business, the rest of my life stretching out ahead of me like a carefully formatted spreadsheet was my business. Instead, I walked around the hedge. A little girl, maybe 7 years old, was sitting on the cold stone floor in a party dress that was 2 sizes too big for her, hugging her knees. She had dark braids and her shoes were slightly untied, and she was crying in the quiet, exhausted way that meant she'd been crying for a while. "Hey," I said, stupidly, because what do you say? She looked up at me. She had enormous brown eyes and a small smear of what looked like chocolate cake on her cheek. "Hi," she said. "Are you okay?" She considered this question with the kind of seriousness only children apply to questions that deserve it. "No," she said finally. "My dad was supposed to pick me up an hour ago, and I think he forgot." I sat down on the cold stone next to her, in my silk dress. At my own engagement party. "What's your name?" I asked. "Marisol," she said. "But everyone calls me Mary." "I'm Claire." "That's a nice name," she said, the way kids say things when they're being polite, because they've been told to be. "Is your dad's number in your phone?" I asked. She shook her head. "I don't have a phone." "I'm 7. "Right. Do you know his number?" She recited it immediately, with the confident precision of a child who had been drilled on emergency contacts. I called it from my phone. It rang 4 times. "Hello?" The voice was slightly out of breath, like someone who'd been running. "Hi, this is Claire. I'm at the Harborview Hotel. I have a little girl here named Marisol who says you're her father?" There was a sharp exhale. "Oh God. Oh, I'm so sorry, I'm on my way. I got stuck at It Doesn't Matter." "Is she okay? Can I talk to her?" I handed the phone to Mari, who said "Hi Daddy" in the voice of someone who was relieved but also preparing a lecture. She handed it back. "I'm about 10 minutes away," the voice said. "I'm so sorry to ask, but could you stay with her until I get there?" I know that's a lot to ask of a stranger. I looked at Mari, who was looking at me with her enormous brown eyes and her untied shoes. "I'll stay," I said. His name was Daniel. He arrived in 9 minutes, slightly flushed, in a button-down shirt that suggested he'd come from somewhere with a dress code. He was maybe 35, with the same dark eyes as his daughter and the look of a person who was perpetually managing 3 things at once. He crouched down immediately to Mari's level, not in the performative way adults do it, but in the natural, automatic way that told you he'd been doing it for years. "I'm sorry, Bug," he said quietly. "Dad messed up." Mari patted his shoulder. "It's okay," she said, with the generous forgiveness of someone who had decided to let it go. "Claire stayed with me." He looked up at me then. "Thank you," he said, and the way he said it had actual weight, not the reflexive politeness of a stranger. Something more careful than that. "It was nothing," I said. He stood. "Are you a guest here?" "Engagement party," I said. Something shifted in his expression. "Yours?" "Apparently." He looked at me just for a moment, the way people look at you when something you've said doesn't quite add up. Then, he seemed to decide it wasn't his business. "Well," he said, "thank you, Claire, really." They left. I watched Mari take his hand as they walked toward the parking garage. She was telling him something about the chocolate cake, very seriously, and he was listening like it was the most important thing he'd heard all day. I stood on that terrace for another few minutes before I went back inside. Derek was looking for me. My mother found me first. "Where were you?" she said, in the low, controlled voice she used when she wanted to express displeasure without visibly expressing displeasure. "Outside," I said. "Claire, this is your party." "I know, Mom. Derek's been asking for you." I looked across the room at Derek, who was now talking to my father about something golf-related. He hadn't actually come to look for me himself. He'd sent my mother. "I'm going to get some water," I said. The next 3 weeks I tried very hard not to think about a man I'd spent 11 minutes with on a cold terrace. I went back to work. I attended a cake tasting. I had a long, circular argument with Derek about whether we needed a videographer in addition to a photographer, which Derek won by simply repeating his position until I stopped having the energy to counter it. I called my therapist and described feeling kind of flat, and she asked me thoughtful questions and I gave her sensible answers and nothing changed. I thought about Mari saying I think he forgot in that quiet, unaccusing way. The way Daniel had said Dad messed up, not making excuses, not explaining the traffic or whatever meeting had run long. Just, "I messed up. I'm sorry." Derek had never once said I messed up in 4 years. He was very good at explaining why things weren't his fault. I don't know why that thought arrived so clearly, but once it did, I couldn't put it back. Then, on a Wednesday morning 3 weeks after the engagement party, I was at my desk reviewing a campaign deck when my email pinged. It was from a name I didn't recognize, Daniel Navarro, with the subject line, the cold terrace. He'd looked me up through the hotel event records, he explained in the email, and he knew that was slightly odd, and he was sorry if it was strange, but he'd wanted to properly thank me. His assistant had been supposed to pick up Mari from the hotel sitter and had gotten the times wrong, and he'd been in a meeting he couldn't break until it was almost too late. And when he got there and saw this woman in a silk dress, sitting on the stone floor with his daughter, like it was the most natural thing in the world, he'd thought about it more than he expected to. He was a landscape architect. He designed parks and public green spaces. His office was 3 blocks from my firm. He asked if he could buy me coffee. As a thank you. Nothing more than that. I sat with the email open for 20 minutes. Then I typed back, "Sure, Thursday works." I told myself it was just coffee. A professional courtesy. A normal human thank you exchange. We sat in the corner of a small cafe on Newbury Street for 2.5 hours, and I missed a 1 o'clock meeting I had to apologize for afterward. He was easy to talk to in the way that feels rare, not because he was charming, though he was, but because he actually listened. Not the polite, waiting for his turn listening I'd gotten used to. The kind where the other person holds what you say for a moment before they respond, like they actually want to understand it. I found out that his wife had passed away when Mari was 3. That he'd built his firm from 2 employees to 11. That Mari's favorite thing in the world was tide pools, and she had made him drive to Cape Ann 4 times this summer just to look at them. That he designed parks partly because he believed people needed places to just be, not perform, not produce, just exist. "What made you sit down on the floor with her?" he asked. Most people would have just called the number and handed her off. I thought about that. She looked like she'd been carrying it alone for too long, I said. I know what that feels like. He looked at me for a moment. You're engaged, he said, not as an accusation, just as a fact being noted. I am, I said. He nodded once. He didn't ask anything else about it. We split the check. He said it was nice to meet me properly this time. I walked back to my office in the cold October air and thought about the word properly for the rest of the afternoon. We had coffee again the following Tuesday. And the Tuesday after that. He brought Mari once, on a Saturday, because the babysitter had cancelled, and Mari recognized me immediately and climbed into the chair beside me and told me in full detail about the tide pool she'd visited where she'd found 3 hermit crabs and one of them had been wearing a shell that was too big for it, which she found both funny and a little sad. A shell that doesn't fit, I said. Exactly, said Mari, very seriously. I looked at Daniel. He was smiling at his coffee cup. It was nothing. We were friends. I was engaged. I told myself that every time. Derek and I had dinner with my parents in November, and my mother talked about the wedding for most of it, and Derek talked about the new apartment he wanted to look at after the wedding, a bigger one, in a neighborhood he preferred, and I realized somewhere around the salad course that no one had asked me what I wanted the apartment to look like. Or what neighborhood I'd prefer. Or, really, anything. My mother asked if I'd made a decision about the bridesmaids' dresses yet. I said I was still thinking about it. Derek said, "Just pick something, Claire, we've been talking about this for months." I put down my fork, I picked it back up, I finished my dinner. That night I sat in my apartment, which was my apartment, that I'd chosen, that I'd furnished, and I looked around at the space I'd built for myself, and thought about what was going to change in June. The apartment in Derek's preferred neighborhood, the life arranged around his schedule, his preferences, his version of the 5-year plan. I'd been so focused on the checklist stable, successful, good on paper, that I'd forgotten to ask whether any of it was what I actually wanted. My phone lit up, a text from Daniel. Mari wants to know if you've ever been to Cape Ann. She's making a case for why we should all go before it gets too cold. I looked at the text for a long time. Then I called Derek. I need to talk to you, I said. Can it wait? I'm watching the game. It had waited 4 years. No, I said. It can't. He came over. He sat on my couch with the expression of a person who was already slightly put out by the inconvenience. And I told him the truth, not about Daniel, because there was nothing to tell about Daniel, not yet, but about us. About the hollow feeling that had been living in my chest for longer than I wanted to admit. About the apartment he wanted to look at, the dress in my mother's closet, the centerpiece debate that had taken 3 weeks of my life. About sitting on a cold hotel terrace in a silk dress and feeling more like myself in 11 minutes than I had in 11 months of engagement. Derek was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Is there someone else?" "No," I said. And that was true. Then I don't understand. I know, I said. I'm not sure I can explain it in a way that will make sense to you. Claire, I don't want to do this, I said quietly. I don't want the wedding in June. I don't want the apartment in your neighborhood. I don't want to keep choosing things I don't want because they're what I'm supposed to want. He stared at me. I'm sorry, I said. I'm genuinely, truly sorry. You haven't done anything wrong. I can't. Derek left. My mother called the next morning and I didn't pick up. She called 4 more times. My father texted, "Let's talk when you're ready." My aunt sent a pointed email about deposits. I turned off my phone notifications and sat with the quiet. It was terrifying. It was also the first time I'd breathed fully in almost a year. I texted Daniel the next day. Cape Ann sounds good. We went on a Saturday in late November, the 3 of us, and it was cold enough that Mari wore a hat shaped like a bear, and Daniel brought a thermos of hot chocolate, and nobody was trying to be anything other than exactly what they were. Mari found 4 hermit crabs. She narrated each discovery with scientific precision. Daniel walked beside me along the rock shelf, and at some point our hands were very close together, and then they weren't, Because Mari had found something extraordinary in the water and required immediate consultation. On the drive home, Mari fell asleep in the back seat. Daniel drove, and I looked out the window at the gray Massachusetts coastline, and neither of us said anything for a while, which felt completely easy and completely full at the same time. "How are you doing?" he asked, eventually. He knew about Derek by then. I'd told him, carefully, and he'd listened in that particular way of his and said, "I'm sorry, that's hard," and then asked if I was okay and seemed to actually want to know the answer. "Better than I expected," I said. "You seem like someone who was due some better," he said. I laughed a little. "That's a very specific thing to say. I've been thinking it for a while," he said. And then he didn't say anything else, but he didn't have to. December came. My mother came around, slowly, in the way mothers do, first with anger, then with worry, then with a phone call where she said, carefully, "I just want to understand," and I told her what I'd told Derek, and she was quiet for a long time, and then she said, "I think I knew something was off. I think I didn't want to see it." "Me too," I said. "That boy though," she said, meaning Daniel, because my sister had told her, because my sister tells my mother everything, "You barely know him." "I know," I said. "Be careful, Claire." "I'm being careful," I said. "I'm just not being afraid." There's a difference. It took me a long time to figure out what it was, but there's a difference. The thing about Daniel was that he never made me feel like I needed to be more than I was. Not smaller, not bigger. Not the version of myself that fit a particular narrative. He seemed genuinely curious about who I actually was, and I found that I was curious too about myself, which sounds strange, but I had spent so many years optimizing toward external benchmarks that I'd lost track of the internal ones. I started keeping a journal, nothing profound, just what I noticed, what I wanted, what made me feel more like myself versus less. It sounds like something a therapist assigns as homework, because it was. In February, Daniel and I were walking back from dinner, just the two of us, Mari at her grandmother's, and he stopped at the corner of our street and said, "I need to tell you something." I waited. "I've been trying to be very patient," he said. "Because you just ended something big, and I didn't want to make it about me. But I think you should know, I'm not interested in being your friend. I want to be clear about that." I looked at him. "I've wanted to be clear about that since approximately our third coffee," he said. "But the timing kept being wrong." "The timing is still not great," I said. "I know," he said. "Is that a no?" I thought about standing on a hotel terrace in October, feeling nothing at my own engagement party. I thought about a little girl with untied shoes and a shell that didn't fit. I thought about 4 years of choosing the right answer on someone else's test. "It's not a no," I said. He smiled. Not a performance of a smile. Just the real thing. "Good," he said. "Then can I hold your hand while we walk?" I laughed. "Yes," I said. "You can hold my hand." Spring came. I moved into a smaller apartment, mine, chosen by me, in a neighborhood I liked, which turned out to be a 15-minute walk from Daniel's house. I painted the kitchen yellow, which Derek would have called impractical, and I found I didn't care at all. Mari started calling me by name, and then, one weekend in March, without any announcement, started including me in the category of people whose opinions about hermit crabs she solicited. I accepted the promotion seriously. It wasn't a fairy tale. We argued sometimes small things, how to navigate schedules and separate histories, and the particular weight of a child who had already lost one person and was learning, slowly, to trust me not to disappear. There were evenings that were hard and conversations that required more care than came naturally, and moments where I had to choose, actively, to stay present instead of retreating to the part of myself that was still learning how to be in something real. But I chose it. Every time, I chose it. Not because it was easy, not because it was safe, not because any checklist told me to. Because one October evening I sat on a cold stone floor next to a 7-year-old in a too-big dress, and something that had been quietly falling asleep inside me woke up, and I decided, for the first time in a very long time, to follow it. Some decisions look like chaos from the outside. From the inside, they feel like the first quiet morning after a very long storm. I know what I left. I know what I found instead. And if I had to sit on that cold floor 100 more times in the silk dress, missing the party, failing the checklist, I would do it every single time. I used to think courage was something you summoned in a single dramatic moment, a speech, a confrontation, a door slammed shut. I know now that it's nothing like that. Courage is quieter. It looks more like sitting on a cold stone floor in a silk dress when you're supposed to be inside performing the life everyone expects of you. What happened to me didn't come out of nowhere. It came from 4 years of saying yes when I meant something else. 4 years of choosing the answer that made other people comfortable, the option that looked right on paper, the path that required the least explanation at dinner tables. Every small yes I gave when I should have said I don't know every time I let a conversation end without saying what I actually thought was a brick I laid in a wall between myself and my own life. The engagement party was just the night I finally noticed the wall was there. That's how these things work. Not in explosions, but in accumulation. The choices we make and the ones we avoid making build the life we're living whether we intend them to or not. I didn't wake up one morning unable to feel anything real. I got there one quiet surrender at a time. Mari didn't save me. I want to be clear about that. A 7-year-old with untied shoes and a smear of chocolate cake on her cheek didn't fix anything, but she interrupted something. She pulled me sideways out of an evening that was going exactly according to plan, and in that interruption, I remembered what it felt like to act from instinct instead of obligation. To do something because it was simply the right thing to do in that moment, not because it served a timeline, not because it looked good, not because anyone was watching. That's the thing about integrity. It doesn't ask permission. It doesn't wait for the right circumstances. I sat down on that floor because a child needed someone to sit with her, and in doing that one unplanned, unchoreographed thing, I touched something in myself I hadn't felt in a very long time. The harder part, the part that took real courage, came after. Ending the engagement wasn't a single brave act, it was 100 smaller ones. Picking up the phone, saying the words out loud. Sitting with my mother's silence on the other end of the line. Learning to tolerate the discomfort of disappointing people who loved me without letting that discomfort make my decisions for me. Intelligence without honesty becomes a tool for self-deception. I was smart enough to build a convincing case for a life I didn't want. It took something harder than intelligence, it took the willingness to look clearly at what I actually felt, and to trust that feeling over every external measure of success. What I found on the other side wasn't a perfect story, it was just a real one, a man who listened like he meant it. A little girl who made room for me without asking me to be anything other than what I was. A kitchen I painted yellow because I wanted to. The life you choose with open eyes, even when it's uncertain, will always ask more of you than the life you drift into. But it will also give you something that no amount of perfect planning can manufacture. It will give you yourself.